of the tree of life, I just picked me a plum.
Good evening. This is Rhea Goodman, and welcome to Living Juicy, the show that talks with creative people doing what they love, inspiring others, and creating a niche for themselves that's outside the box. Brought to you at 6:30 Monday nights right here on KSFR and web-streamed live on www.ksfr.org. With Living Juicy, I bring you the people, the events, the ideas that delight, enlighten, inspire, perhaps transform. We talk with healers, artists, performers, dancers, directors, filmmakers, musicians, chefs, writers, poets, cultural anthropologists, and visionaries. During the Santa Fe Film Festival in December, I went to a screening that showed the work of the late Lee Strasberg, the great founder of the Actors Studio in New York. And he was working with an actor very, very effectively. And I was totally intrigued with the whole process, the whole acting process, really, and how to create a character and how to really be who you are. So tonight we're going to talk with distinguished theater artist Francesca Ursone, who is a versatile artist equally at home acting, directing, or teaching. She studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and with the late Lee Strasberg, and in 1995 she was accepted as a full member of the Moscow Art Theater. She's the only actor who was accepted into Lee Strasberg's directing workshop. Francesca directed the late Gabrielle Dell, Broadway star and one of the Dead End Kids, in a project for Lee Strasberg called The Hills Are Like White Elephants. Currently, she'll be directing a documentary interview with David Strasberg, who is the son of Lee Strasberg, and the documentary will be honoring his dad. Francesca lives in Los Angeles, where she teaches the work of the Moscow Art Theater. She's constantly in a directorial conversation with her students as she trains them for film and stage. A frequent visitor to Santa Fe, she serves on the board of the Santa Fe Film Festival and will, next month, be directing a new play that is called Duet. It's being presented by the Red Thread Collective, a nonprofit professional theater group based in Santa Fe, and it will open their winter production on February 22nd. So it is my great pleasure to welcome Francesca. Hi, Francesca.
Greetings, and it's very lovely to be in New Mexico again, even in this cold.
Snap. Doesn't matter. There's a piece about it, huh?
Well, it was so interesting because I saw these wonderful icicles today on the different plants, and it almost looked like they were forming just different sculptures all by themselves. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so beautiful.
The icicles, especially with the snow on them, are really quite magical. And the fact that they don't last make them even more interesting.
Well, I happen to love the snow. Originally, I'm from Connecticut. And I remember ice skating on the ponds as a child, and I kind of miss that. Although I recently bought ice skates.
Oh, there you go. Figure skates, of course.
Absolutely.
But of course, right. What got you into acting, Francesca? How did that come to be?
Well, actually, as a very little girl, I used to put on little shows in my backyard in Connecticut in the spring. I remember taking the lilacs from my grandmother's bushes and putting them on the little children to make them look pretty for the show and selling lemonade. But really, it was kind of a secret. I don't think people really knew I was doing a show in the backyard and then kind of corking up the kids' faces and kind of wanting to be the leader, but no one really noticed. It was sort of my own little secret. And, of course, I didn't know anything about what that word would mean, acting, actress, directing. I mean, it was just something inside of me that I was compelled to do. I think that children all go toward what innately is in them. Some will go toward hammers and nails. Some will go toward art. Some pick up a paintbrush. And for me, it was putting the show on.
So who was your first acting teacher? How did you end up with Lee Strasberg?
Well, before I actually say that, I had decided when I was about 14 or 15 that I wanted to be an actress. And I went to my father, and we lived on a mink ranch in Connecticut. So I was brought up in the country, and one day I said to my father, "You know, Dad, I'd really like to be an actress." And my father wouldn't hear of it. He was just absolutely devastated that I would even think of such a thing. And I was brought to tears in an argument. And of course, he was just trying to protect me from the perils and dangers of life. But at the time, it seemed just horrible. However, I did have a teacher in high school, Mr. Tierney, and I did win Best Actress in my high school class. So that gave me some hope in this rather interesting and mystical kind of career that I wanted to pursue.
And then how did you discover the Actors Studio? I mean, that's a biggie in New York.
Well,
Anywhere.
my father didn't want me to become an actress, so I had absolutely no encouragement from anyone.
But that's traditional, of course.
I hope
mean,
so. I'd like to think so. I
Yeah.
love my dad dearly and miss him very much. He's left the planet, but I'm terribly, terribly sad that he's not here with me now. But he is in spirit. I went to the University of Connecticut, and there was a play that was being done, and it was between another girl and myself, and I lost the part, and she actually starred in the film The Russians Are Coming with actually
Alan Arkin.
and with Alan Arkin and John Philip Law, who became a good friend of mine years later. And I got discouraged, and I said, I'm leaving the University of Connecticut, and I went to New York and then flew to California, and reluctantly and fearfully called the Lee Strasberg Institute for an interview with Lee Strasberg. And I did get accepted. And that was the beginning of my journey, my serious journey into the world of learning the craft of acting.
So what specifically, could you, for the radio audience, talk a little about the legendary Lee Strasberg and what it is that he teaches and what it is specifically, what the gifts are that you came away with from having worked with Lee?
Well, Lee Strasberg actually went to Russia, went to Moscow, and met with Stanislavski, and brought the modern theater back to America and called it the method. That was his interpretation of how he would approach the technique of acting for the American people, for the American actor.
And really describing it as a method.
Well, what it
Because
is,
it is
truly, it's a technique where we get into our senses, a sense of touch, our sense of smell, what we call an emotional memory, what personal objects. So we are always, in truth, working with ourselves. It is always a journey into the exploration of self. And Lee Strasberg often said, it is the only craft which we have to only ourselves to use. We don't have a paintbrush to paint with. We don't have a violin to play. We are our own instrument. And therefore, we have to learn this technique as one learns any other technique. For instance, emotional memory is a place where you have to go back into a time of something that did happen to you, where you then can bring that emotion into present time and connect it with the character that you're playing. Now,
so for example, you're playing a character who is about to cry about the loss of something. So that would evoke in you a sense memory of something or someone whom you have lost, yes?
Someone that I've lost, or someone or something that evokes a specific emotion in me. For instance, Lee used to say, most of us have had a pet, and we understand the feeling of losing that pet. And so you connect that feeling with what you are having to do in the character, which has nothing to do with the pet, but has to do with the emotion that you get from that. But you often have to do many different sensory things at one time. That is, you cannot do one thing. You might be smelling the air. You might be having the sensory memory of the emotional memory at the same time. You might have be feeling something that's tactile. That all of that works at the same time. So the process is discovering what works when in the scene.
No, I'm not clear about the use of the different senses. So you're
Well,
finding
for instance, you can have the sense of smell.
Okay.
So you can.
So
certain
bring up
perfumes would bring back.
Well, the smell of your dog.
Anything that
Sure.
evokes a feeling or smell changes your emotional attitude, and that again will help you in the technique of putting it into the scene.
And so that would telegraph itself. I mean, just the fact that you're experiencing it
Absolutely.
would totally telegraph itself to the audience.
Yes, it does. If it comes from within you, it will definitely translate to the audience as a real emotion.
Okay, so in the film that I saw, Francesca, Lee, there were times when you were trying to give him what he was asking for, and he kept correcting you to get back on track, to get more and more internal, more real. Could you describe what that process was like from your point of view?
Well, the process of acting always starts with a sense of relaxation.
Ah, yes, you relaxed a very long time.
Yes, and a sense of breathing.
Yeah.
And a sense of really, even to your fingers, letting everything, the energy flow through you without constriction, or as little constriction as possible. And part of that process he has is what similar to a primal scream, in that we have to release. During our exercises, we had to almost release like a scream from our chest, but not a scream that comes from our throat. It comes from our diaphragm to give us a sense of freedom and relaxation. So in that exercise, what you first saw was him trying to get me to relax more and more. Of course, I was doing that in front of 200 people.
Yeah.
200 actors were out there watching this. So I was nervous and scared, and to be directed by Lee Strasberg was, one didn't know if I was going to be able to successfully do what he asked me to do.
Yeah.
So that's what you saw, the beginning of what you saw.
Now, what was also intriguing is that you had prepared a scene, or you had memorized a scene, and he had you do it many different ways. He had you do it while you were putting on makeup. I remember being madly impressed with that. While you were miming, of course, putting on makeup. Mm-hmm. He had you doing it several other ways. Can you talk about that and what that, I mean, obviously, the more you're busy with another action, the more real the text will come across.
Well, what that really is that in the process of learning how to act, which is never acting, it's deep truth, deep behavior, deep expression that comes from within us. We often get into a pattern of saying things in a specific way and not realizing that by a different activity, the expression of it changes tremendously.
Yes.
So if we're saying something in a shower, which was an exercise he often gave us, as opposed to putting on our makeup or putting our clothes on in the morning, these were different, and the way we would say things would come out very differently and very surprisingly differently and very real.
For sure. Yeah. And that, of course, is what came across in the video that I saw, whatever it was. Yeah, I guess it was a video. Because, again, I remember you putting on and then he had you do the same scene crying, perhaps?
Yes, he did. Well, actually, at the time that we did that, I didn't know they were videoing it.
And I'm lucky for you.
I'm so happy that I didn't know it, because it would have made it even more difficult for me.
Of course.
But I remember coming home that day. I must have gotten home about 4:30 in the afternoon. I remember the sun just beginning to set and taking this breath and feeling this was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, one of the most extraordinary days of my life. And to have had that experience was so unique, and I was so grateful to have been chosen by him to do that.
Had he picked you just before that scene was done, or was that something you were prepared to do?
Oh, no, there was no preparation. He just told me he was going to work with me that day, so I had no idea what we were going to do.
And you did have some text ready. You did have
No,
a scene.
I did not.
You did have a scene.
No, absolutely nothing. I didn't know what it was he was going to say or not say.
But
so.
you did have a scene that you
Well,
played
I have
several
a
different ways.
scene right now I could say for you. That's in my mind, in my head, from
you-
things I've done. So
You always have a scene in your head.
Well, I mean, I have, for instance, I've worked on The Winter's Tale Shakespeare, and I certainly know some of it offhand.
Yeah.
I had to say it impromptu.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Well, would you like to do a couple of lines, if that would be comfortable for you?
Well, I can certainly try. Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation, and the testimony on my part no other than what comes from myself, it shall scarce boot me to say, not guilty. Mine integrity being counted falsehood, shall as I express it be so received? But thus, if powers divine behold our human conscience as they do, I doubt not yet that false accusation shall make tyranny blush, and innocence tremble at patience.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. Tell us, if you would, what makes a good actor? What are the qualities?
At the Moscow Art Theater, where we have studied the works of Chekhov, who began his writing career in Siberia as a doctor and had witnessed so much tragedy and so much of life itself, that I think that art comes through a certain amount of suffering, a certain amount of feelings that go deeply into tragedy. And through that, we experience great joy. But beyond that, I don't think, unless you have the gift of acting, I think it's truly a gift from God. And intrinsically, we can learn how to make it better, and we can learn the techniques. However, if we don't have the feelings to begin with, and sometimes we don't even know why we really have them, they're just there, then we can refine them and we can shape them and work with them. But I don't think, unless you're driven towards it, one should try to do it.
So I hear that, of course, and it is a matter of real focus and real dedication and real impulse to do this. And what are the qualities particularly necessary? Who are the actors that you admire, and what are the qualities that make them special for you? Meryl Streep, I mean, I can mention...
Well, Julie Christie has just been given an award for On Her Way.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Away from Her.
Yeah. And I've always followed Julie Christie's work from the time she was in
Darling.
Yeah.
Actually,
that was her first movie.
Yeah, she was wonderful.
She was wonderful in that. And then, of course, no one can ever forget David Lean's Dr. Zhivago.
Of course.
And she just has about her a poetic nature that she extends into her voice, into her eyes, and into her body language, and into her being. And I think that I certainly have been a follower of her work and an admirer of her work. I think that, and I've been asked this question before, I think that Angela Jolie, who's now in the news every day, in fact, I worked with her mother. I'd studied with her mother at the Lee Strasberg Institute, and she's a great admirer of Lee's work. And I've been told...
Who is her mom? I know her dad is John Voight.
Her mother's first name, I think, was... Let me think. I can't think of her name at the moment.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I can't think of her mom's first name at the moment. But I probably will as we go along here. She just lost her mother. But I think Angela Jolie is very connected to herself and very connected sensorially to what she does.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd certainly say she would be on my list. Daniel Day-Lewis is just an absolute genius.
God.
I mean,
God.
There's genius acting for you.
Genius.
And
Total.
something again, that just proves the point of what I'm saying. I don't think you can learn that kind of work. I think I think Ralph Fiennes also is another genius actor of our generation.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think it has to do, for one thing, with transparency? I mean, that's a word that when I see an actor being so deeply himself and so real in the moment, there's a kind of transparency that takes place that so that we can access the same emotion.
Absolutely. It is a transparency. It is the ability to show emotion without fear of showing it. It is revealing an emotion on the stage or film so that it can evoke emotion in you. And in the Moscow Art Theater in Russia, they take theater so seriously and feel it's almost a spiritual place where the actor can give to the audience a sense of themselves, where we air our joys and our sorrows and our tragedies in a certain time and space. So we are connecting with each other. We are revealing to each other our experiences of existence. And in that experience, we can help each other be all that we are and give each other hope to stay alive.
I think the backstory of what you're saying, really, Francesca, is that most people do not access their emotional, not only do not access them, but do not know how to express them. And in a way, it's the job of the actor to be so transparent in their accessing of their emotions that the audience can get it and can just move into their space.
Absolutely. The one thing that I've discovered when I have taught is that people, actors or actors, aspiring actors, put limitations on themselves. And there's a sense of paralysis in all of us where we don't really have the freedom to go beyond what we think are our limitations, which are really not.
Here's the phrase then, challenge your beliefs, because that's the way that you go past your structures about what you can do and what you can't do.
I find, however, that one does need a teacher to do that. And a teacher needs a teacher like a psychiatrist needs a psychiatrist. You can't be your own judge and jury. You have to be the eye of the potential actor and give them the strength and the confidence that they can unblock those areas of their body that are constricting them and not allowing them to be free as they potentially can be.
Francesca, how did you get connected to the Moscow Art Theater? That's an interesting association indeed.
Well, that was a story that started with pure luck. I had a friend who worked for a literary agency and found in some recycling papers an ad for the Moscow Art Theater and called me and said, my gosh, they're interviewing for the Moscow Art Theater. And I was just said, my gosh, wouldn't that be something to try out for that? I had been to the Moscow Art Theater in the 80s, and I had filmed the Moscow Art Theater with Burgess Meredith as a documentary. But never did I have any thought of getting into it as an actress this 10 years later. And I called a dear friend of mine, Ivan Moffat, who was like a family member to me. He wrote Giant with James Dean. And I said to him, actually, his grandfather founded the Moscow Art Theater, Sir Peter Tree. And as you said, I had gone to the Moscow Art Theater. And I said, Ivan, I want to try out for the Moscow Art Theater. And he said, well, let me see what scene you're going to do. And I began repeating something from Suddenly Last Summer by Tennessee Williams. And he said, well, I think you need some help. And why don't you call Kim Stanley? Who's considered the
Wonderful
female
actor.
Marlon Brando and
Yeah.
one of the best American actresses. And as you know, is from Santa Fe. And she was just leaving to move to Santa Fe. And I begged her to coach me. And she did. She coached me for the Moscow Art Theater. And I always will attribute my getting in to Kim Stanley.
Wow, wonderful.
And then I had to fly to Pittsburgh for my interview and ultimately did get in. But Kim Stanley played a big part in that.
Francesca, we've only got about 4 minutes left, and I'd love for you to talk very briefly about your directorial effort that's coming up in Santa Fe and Duet. Just tell us a little bit about this play that's going to be opening end of February.
Well, it is a play about Sarah Bernhardt and Eleanor Duse, who've been considered two of the greatest actresses that ever lived. And it is about their existence and history and their similarities and their internal differences and their different styles of acting. Both actresses revealed their soul, but did it in a very different way, which we will see on stage.
One from the outside in, one from the inside out?
Well, not necessarily. It's just that Eleanor Duse did not have the dance type style that Sarah Bernhardt did. So Sarah Bernhardt was very big with all her gestures and all of her expressions. However, what's very interesting is there were tremendous parallels in both of their childhoods. And we see a catharsis. We see a journey into their lives and how they come together. I think it's going to be a very exciting play.
Wonderful. That's great. So I'm giving you all a heads up about that. That's going to be at the, where's it going to be performed? At the El Museo Cultural.
That's right.
And it's through the Red Thread Collective, and tickets are going to be on sale, and they're 992-0251. Before we close, Francesca, what are your goals in present time? What's happening for you?
Well,
what do you want to achieve?
I think the most wonderful thing in life is to have a voice where someone could hear you speak, where you can actually share something. And in part of my teaching, I always say Einstein said that imagination is more powerful than knowledge. And I look at children, and acting classes are very expensive today, in this day and age, and I would like to be able to reach out to children who don't have the opportunity to study theater, who have wonderful imaginations, and be able to express to them not to give up, to use whatever it is that is in their environment to create with, and to keep giving to themselves all that they want to. I would love to go anywhere in this world and help children and give them acting classes when I can. I think there's just a man on television yesterday who was a very big CEO with the computer companies and left it all to go to the Himalayas and read and give books to children.
Wow.
And I think, gosh, wouldn't I love to go there and give an acting class to those children?
Great idea. What a wonderful, wonderful goal. That's terrific. You've started rehearsals then for Duet?
I have. I've been rehearsing all day. This is my third day. And
great.
I've got a wonderful cast. And
of two, Rima Miller is one of them.
Yes.
She's marvelous.
She really
Rima.
is. I'm so happy to hear you say that.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. I'm a big fan of Rima, and the other actor is?
Cynthia Strauss.
Who plays Duse.
Yes, she does.
Well, it has been a great pleasure talking with you, Francesca Ursone. I think I pronounced it right that time.
You pronounced it very beautifully, actually.
Thank you. You have been a wonderful guest, Francesca.
I hope so.
And listen up next week. We're going to have somebody almost equally juicy. What's juicy for you? Quick. What's living juicy? What does it mean for you?
A persimmon from a persimmon tree.
Yes, I love persimmons. Yes. Okay. Thanks again, Francesca Ursone.
Thank you. It was fun to be with you, and thank you for the interview.
You bet. Listen up next week, guys, and Happy New Year again. Good night.
You came along and everything started to hum. Still, it's a real good bet, the best is yet to come.